South Africa is on a mission to become a knowledge-based economy where science and technology drive productivity and economic growth. This is where organizations such as the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research play a crucial role in driving innovation across various sectors. In this CNBC Africa special, we highlight the achievements of the CSIR over its 70-year existence.
And I'd like to applaud the CSIR and you, Minister, for leading this institution and many others that you do, but especially the CSIR for the outstanding work that you do here at this place. You do really do good work. And as the title of this conference is about ideas that work and using science to our future through science. As a country, we commend the positive, progressive contribution made by the CSIR to advance science, engineering, and technology in the democratic era. As we entered this place, I was saying to Minister Naledi, 21 years ago, many of us, particularly black people, would never have found it easy to come into this place, into this space, let alone being enabled to do the type of work that I saw being done today. So this means we have made a great deal of progress, and more than 50% of the people who do fantastic work here are now truly representative of the demographics of our country, and that the CSIR should be applauded for. And thank you very much for doing that.
A lot of the work, starting from the very beginning, arose from technologies that had been used a great deal during the course of the Second World War, radar technologies. Now, a radar technology as a mechanism not only for activities in aerospace and the defense industry, but in civilian applications. Today, for example, it's possible to use radar satellites to monitor the movements of, say, vessels off the coast. Now, this is something that can be important if we want to monitor and combat illegal fishing of our coast, for example, and because such satellites can see through cloud, the weather conditions are not necessarily going to be an impediment. Now, we have a strength that dates back 70 years and in various uses and further development of radar technologies. That's part one. There's a whole host of other areas of expertise with applications in health, applications, material science. That's a very strong area where we develop new materials for a variety of different applications. Such as we're talking about packaging food, for example, in materials that are going to allow food to have a longer shelf life. So, I can name a whole variety of examples of that nature.
We definitely don't have enough time to discuss all the achievements of the CSIR here. You touched on the various industries that the research is conducted on. Mm-hmm. Energy must be huge and important, especially given the situation in South Africa and across the continent. What work is the CSIR doing in this particular sector?
Energy is indeed huge, and our particular focus in that area is more on renewables. Work that has to do with harnessing solar, harnessing wind, but also, I believe I may have mentioned earlier, maybe not, that we have done work on battery technologies, and the better battery technologies are going to be absolutely critical for the storage of energy, in particular as we seek to tap renewables which are not available, which are very, such as sunlight, such as wind. It is not constantly available through 24 hours a day, so we must have mechanisms to store it. So we've done work in battery technologies. We have a track record in that area, and this is an area that we want to continue to do, along with interesting areas like hydrogen storage. People talk about the use of hydrogen and for fuel cells and so on, and very much at the fore of that kind of work. But beyond that, we want to use the CSIR itself as, if you like, as a demonstrator, a large-scale demonstrator of what is possible by way of provision of energy from renewables to a big campus such as this. So if we were to go and have a look at the other side, on the other side of the hill, you'll see that we've got a solar farm of photovoltaics, and it will enable us not just to deploy and use energy from that, but to test different technologies, and with the evolution of new technologies for building photovoltaic cells, which ones work best in our environment and therefore in South Africa.
So we've touched on various industries. I want to talk to you now a bit about partnerships, whether it be with private sector, whether academic institutions or with government. How closely does the CSIR work with these various players in the economy?
Well, firstly, we work necessarily with science councils similar to ourselves. We're talking earlier about the work we're doing, for example, we do with the Agricultural Research Council. There was a launch just a little earlier, a launch of 2-minute noodles. 2-minute noodles that involve the use of mrojo, our local spinaches, if you like, in South Africa, that we have been working on together with Nestle. It's launched today to be available from the supermarkets as a product of Nestle. Now, that already is an example of CSIR working with other science councils, working with industry. I want to give another one, and that has to do with the fact that we have such a rich wealth of mineral resources in this country. We typically will dig the stuff and export it, and other people make the finished products. And the whole drive behind beneficiation is about creating an industry that adds value to such minerals right here in South Africa. And some minerals are very difficult to work with, but are plentiful and high value. Titanium is a case in point. Now we've been working with the aerospace industry to generate titanium products, ultimately to make components for aerospace right here in South Africa. And there we're partnering with the likes of ultimately Airbus, Boeing, locally with the likes of Aerosud, and we are very excited about that one.
While innovation is crucial for economic growth, less than 1% of South Africa's budget is allocated to the Department of Science and Technology.
In all countries that I have studied that have had successful economic progress, none of them have been able to achieve that progress without investment in science, technology, and innovation. Countries that we admire today, that we regard as most successful, have been very clever about how they invest in science, technology, and innovation. And that occurs in a range of ways. Firstly, you must have the human capital. But I believe you have to have institutions such as the CSIR, which become your foundation and your strategic edge in ensuring that you address the range of objectives that you have. In South Africa, we're striving very hard to pursue economic growth, but also to attend to 3 challenges, which are poverty, inequality, as well as unemployment. And we constantly ask the CSIR, how do you respond to these? How do you use science, technology, and innovation in order to address these challenges? Now, it won't happen at the first instance of investment or project development. It takes time, but the benefit is of very long duration. So if you develop a new drug to address tuberculosis in the health section of the CSIR, you're helping us attend to a very serious health pandemic in South Africa, but on the continent as well. You're producing a drug that we will market in the commercial space. You're improving the success of our public health system to address a very difficult problem. And you also create the capacity for the emergence of a new pharmaceutical sector in South Africa. Mineral resources are an important area. Africa has relied on extraction of mineral resources, a rich resource it has, sending all of this out there and purchasing back beneficiated products. You work with an institution like CSIR to see whether you can indeed value add, and you identify minerals that can play a role in this particular sector, and your scientists contribute to you developing novel technologies, novel approaches to value addition, and thus converting what is extracted and exported into a product that you value add in here, and then you export it as a high-end product for which your country generates huge economic benefit.
The biggest factor holding back economic growth in Africa is the lack of energy. And with advancements in technology, it has become cheaper to generate power from renewable resources as opposed to fossil fuels.
Well, the big issue with energy is that at the moment 90% of the energy that we actually use comes from carbon-based materials, coal, oil, and natural gas, and that's the cause of the pollution in CO2 emissions, which is creating absolute havoc in terms of global warming, acidifying the oceans, affecting marine life and such like. And the planet cannot sustain that. I mean, if you imagine that every year billions and billions of tons of liquid fuel get consumed and burnt, it's going to have an impact. And we've been going now since the Industrial Revolution, when oil was first refined and coal was in place. It's 150, nearly 200 years of emitting just this huge tonnage of CO2 into the atmosphere. It's just unsustainable.
Renewables such as wind and solar power generators just 10 years ago were almost an order of magnitude more expensive than conventional new power generators. Countries like Germany, Europe, the US, China, they invested heavily, subsidy-driven into renewables and brought the cost down. So they paid the school fees to some extent, and now everybody can benefit from that. And in South Africa, as we speak today, new solar PV and new wind turbines are cheaper than a new coal-fired power station.
And we see that South Africa is going down the route of building new coal-powered stations which have gone hugely over cost. I want to touch on another huge opportunity for South Africa, embedded generation, and for homeowners to generate their own electricity through solar panels on their roof and selling the excess back into the grid. How big of an opportunity is this for South Africa?
Well, I think embedded generation, especially in the form of rooftop solar PV, is a huge opportunity for almost every country because it has inherently a number of benefits that other form of power generation don't have. Those benefits are you have reduced grid losses because you generate the power directly at the place where you consume the power as well, whether it's in your own house or in your neighbor's house or in the area. So there are benefits from a system perspective. And then you have another benefit which is more a socio-economic benefit. You increase, you broaden and you widen the ownership base of your power generation fleet in the country. So now suddenly again, at the example of Germany, Germany has now 1.5 million power generators coming from a few hundred. And these 1.5 million are predominantly solar rooftop systems on residential, commercial and industrial roof spaces owned by individuals. So that is a completely different structure of the ownership base.
This is a huge opportunity for South Africa and the rest of the continent, but there's a severe challenge, especially when you look at here in South Africa. Municipalities generate large portions of their revenue through selling electricity at differentiated tariffs. Embedded generation could severely cannibalize their revenues. I understand the work that you've been doing at the CSIR, developing a policy proposal about how to mitigate that loss. Tell us a bit about this.
Yes, that is correct. When you install a solar system on your roof and you consume some of the energy yourself and the excess you feed back into the grid, now that part of the energy that you've consumed yourself is essentially reducing the amount of sales that the municipality sells to you. Now that is a problem for the municipality because there are certain fixed costs that the municipality is facing, running the grid, operating the grid, billing you, metering you. These are all costs that don't scale with the amount of kilowatt hours that they sell. So now they have to distribute the same amount of costs across a lower amount of sales. And that is, I mean, it's not that this is a situation that is completely unbearable. In very, very extreme cases, we are talking of an effect of maybe 10, maximum 15% on the municipality. It's not that they will go completely underwater, but it is something that needs to be considered. And we developed a concept where we basically said that problem from a municipality perspective can literally only be embraced or solved if you implement a national approach to it. And we said in very simple terms, let's create a central aggregator for the entire country that buys the excess energy from embedded generators, aggregates it and puts it then onto the market, meaning sells it forward to Eskom. And in a second function, that aggregator pays the municipalities a financial compensation to cover for the grid costs. And that financial compensation is calculated in such a manner that the municipality is simply financially indifferent to a world with PV or without PV. So it's not making them any better off, but it also doesn't make them worse off.
This is going to be a challenge that's going to be pursuing going forward in terms of when embedded generation does become a reality here. I wanted to ask you about the study that you recently conducted looking at the cost, benefit and savings of renewables, which have been ramped up in South Africa, significant savings. Tell us a bit about that.
Yes, we had in the last year, in 2014, we had almost 2 gigawatts of renewable power generators coming onto the grid. That's a very fast ramp up, first of all. And the Department of Energy must be applauded for the process that they have put in place to actually make that happen and to deploy renewables with that speed. Now we wanted to understand what is the effect of these 2 gigawatt fleet of solar PV and wind on the conventional fleet, on the Eskom fleet. How did it help Eskom, and how did it help Eskom to save burning coal, to save burning diesel, and in extreme cases even to avoid the curtailment of customer load, or in extreme case load shedding. We developed a methodology where we looked now at hourly production data from the different supply sources, solar, wind, coal, nuclear and so on. And we analyzed hour by hour what was the effect of these new power generators on the conventional fleet and on the power system security of supply situation. And we found that as a result of solar PV and wind, the country made a net benefit of 4 billion rand in the first 6 months of 2015. So that's how much the value of renewables was larger than the actual cost of the renewables.
Time for a short break. We'll be right back with more from the disruptive world of technology right after this. Welcome back to the CNBC Africa special celebrating the achievements of the CSIR. From healthcare to energy and agriculture, biotechnology is developing new drugs, fuels and seed varietals to make these industries more competitive.
Biotech has a very, very important role that it plays in ensuring that us as a continent can access products that typically we struggle to access, mainly because of cost barriers. So with biotech, one will be able to develop new procedures, methods, etc. to develop new drugs. So for example, if you look in the space of cancer, where there are biologics that are in the market for treatment of those, now that they're coming off patent, here's an opportunity for us to find cheaper alternative methods to develop similar biologics, but which will be at a fraction of the price. So then you can imagine the impact that this can have. And it's not just in cancer, but also for infectious diseases. One of the things that we struggle with is being able to detect infectious diseases quite early on. With biotech, one can be able to find those markers in the body that will tell you at which point does this patient start showing symptoms or start developing diabetes. And so you'll be able to track quite early on in disease progression, and therefore be able to treat them for a specific disease quite early.
This will definitely play a critical role within the entire continent, where we see the number of people dying from non-communicable diseases is absolutely staggering. Let's move on to another sector where biotech, biosciences play a critical role. Agriculture. What benefits do you see here?
I mean, for us as a country, the benefits are really massive. I mean, we know that agro-processing has been prioritized by national government to be a sector that can give us really the big opportunities in creating jobs. And specifically, biotech there has a number of opportunities, and I'll speak about one. For example, when you cultivate crops, typically you would put pesticides. With biotech, you can stay away from chemical pesticides and use bio-based pesticides, which are much safer. But also what you can do with biotech is to be able to detect, to develop sensors that would be able to, before you cultivate the specific crop, you would be able to sense if they still have any residues of this pesticides. So really giving us technologies that are not invasive, but those that can allow us to even improve the yield of our crops.
Let's turn now to industry and the way that biotech can benefit various sectors within South Africa's economy. What do you want to highlight here?
Yeah. I mean, critically, a topical issue is in the energy space, where we're looking at alternative energies. I mean, on the continent, it's about wind, solar, etc. But there is an opportunities about bio-based fuels, where we can take some of our crops, and utilize some of the waste from that, convert it to biofuels. There you would use specific biomaterials such as bacteria, etc., that we know that would transform these plants. But secondly, also in wastewater treatment, there's specifically bacteria that we know that if you put them into some certain waste streams, they would eradicate the waste that is in those streams. So the opportunities are numerous.
So we touched on some key sectors. Now let's talk about the capacity that South Africa has for biotechnology. Do we have the skills? Do we have enough graduates coming through? Do we have the infrastructure to facilitate growth in the sector?
Sure. I'll start with the skills. I think South Africa is well placed. We have top universities that are working in these respective sectors. We definitely have the relevant skills from an academic perspective, but also developing relevant skills from an industry perspective. From an infrastructure and capacity, I think there's still need for us as government to invest more into typically the kind of infrastructure that one would need for some of these solutions. And then lastly, from the uptake perspective, the needs are there, we know them, but mechanisms and models of how do we take these solutions, commercialize them into products that will benefit the people of the country. So we need investments into creating enterprises, investments into developing skills around entrepreneurship, biotech-specific entrepreneurship. So there are areas where we're strong as a country, but there are areas where we still need to invest in those spaces specifically.
Another industry that benefits hugely from technological advancement is South Africa's manufacturing sector, which has been hard hit by volatile economic conditions and has suffered numerous job losses.
It's really across the board, but of course there are specific sectors where there are great examples that we can look at. For instance, after the global financial crisis, our structural steel manufacturers were having quite a tough time given the competition that they were receiving from the Middle East, where piped natural gas is much cheaper, and technology developments that happened in Europe. They needed to catch up with those technology developments and therefore had to purchase technology that would help them to mechanize a number of processes.
I see you touched on steel, and that's a great aspect. We've seen that South Africa's government stepping in to impose tariffs to protect South Africa's steel industry. Is that an issue just because is it China's industry is subsidized? South Africa can't compete with that? What's your view here?
Well, South Africa has to compete, steel industry in particular, has to compete in an environment that's heavily subsidized in terms of exports coming in. So those guys, the exporters coming into South Africa, are enjoying unfair advantages over the South African manufacturers, and it's exacerbated by the global glut of steel. So guys are pushing it onto our market to get rid of steel that they can't find any other markets for. That's why these protections are necessary, but it's also going to create complications for downstream low value add steel manufacturers who might also need protection or might need to look at other solutions, and they are focusing around that presently.
That's a very important point for the downstream consumers of steel in South Africa, whether it's engineering firms or whatever the case may be there. But they are going to suffer ultimately if they have to buy more expensive steel from the domestic market. That impacts their business. What do you see the solution to being here? Do they need protection? How is that going to take form?
Well, there are numerous interests at play here, and I would love to be smart enough to say that here's a single solution. Not even the industry is smart enough to be able to do that. They are engaging in research and workshopping possible solutions for that now. The crucial area is the low value add downstream steel manufacturers. So Structural Steel, CSIR, the Manufacturing Circle and the Steel Institute have gotten together to together tackle this problem. They're doing research, they're doing workshopping around that, and hopefully will come to a common position soon, which they will then go to government with.
As we enter the information age, access to the internet is becoming increasingly important to foster a productive workforce, and South Africa is rolling out various projects to connect the country.
Geographically, we're actually doing quite well. We've got most of South Africa covered. Fiber-wise, there's a few areas in South Africa that's not covered, and it's the biggest challenge in broadband is that last mile, getting from the fiber to your house, to your business, to where you are. And you often experience problems with calls being dropped, quality not great, and that's a spectrum issue, so there's congestion, which is part of this access. So what we're looking at is how do you get the fiber closer, how much fiber do you need, and those rural areas where the business case is not that strong, where it's not clear why to invest, what should government do to make it more attractive to invest there?
Let's hone in on that very aspect, those rural areas where it doesn't make business sense for industry to step in there, they can't get their return on capital. That's where government plays a critical role. How can they get involved in this way?
So, in the first instance, government has to look after the social aspects of education, of health provision, of infrastructure. And in that sense, we see government playing a strong role as a buyer. If you take all those areas, government can aggregate their demand. They can say, okay, how much can we invest as government just to address the demand which exists because of government? Secondly, we've got the Universal Service Fund, which is supposed to help co-fund the investments into areas that's not serviced, i.e. the areas that don't have the infrastructure. And I think in the combination of investing in those areas together with government actually doing the take-up and paying for the services being rendered by whoever builds the infrastructure is the way to go.
You also mentioned that the last mile, of course, is the key issue, and we see all across the country the roads are being dug up to put in fibre. That's hugely expensive. So what other technologies are there to assist in that last mile? It seems that wireless is going to be the option.
Wireless is the way to go. Challenge is which wireless and whether it should only be in the big players' hands, should it also be the small players. We see stuff happening around Wi-Fi, hotspots, which is really the short, unlicensed distance kind of things. I think there's a space for everybody. I think we're working very closely with the regulator to look at how can you manage the spectrum more dynamically so you get more efficiency out of the spectrum and not just the basic static applications of spectrum. I think the future is bright in terms of getting the spectrum out there.
As South Africa transitions from a resource-based to a knowledge economy, we've seen how technology improves the delivery and efficiency of various industries from energy to agriculture, and how organizations like the CSIR play a fundamental role in developing the skills base that drives innovation, which ultimately leads to economic growth.